Today on Free Range Q&A with Al Kresta, we look at polygamy, the Novus Ordo Mass, a study which claims that 95% of women don't regret their abortions. And does Al love or hate Jews? Welcome to this inaugural edition of Free Range Q&A with Al Kresta from the studios of Ave Maria Radio. Let's start taking some questions from Facebook, Twitter, and email. Peter in Naples, Florida asks, I happened to turn on your show today and clearly you are trying to promote the Jews. Why? Christ established only one religion, the Catholic religion. All the rest is man-made religious entertainment. In other words, the Jews blow. Catholicism should be the only concern for Catholics. What do you say?
The first thing I say is that your attitude towards the Jews is taken not from the Catholic Church, but from the father of lies. The Jews as a people are immensely important to us. Jesus was a Jew. His mother Mary, the daughter of Zion, was a Jew. St. Paul, the Pharisee of Pharisees, was a Jew. Virtually all the authors of the New Testament were Jews. In fact, if you look at St. Paul in Romans 9 through 11, what you'll learn is that he spends those 3 chapters arguing that the Jews will be saved and that he himself would rather be cut off from the covenant if it meant the salvation of his kinsmen. You know, he makes the argument that the Jews have a calling and a gift that are irrevocable. And so what you find is we've got the scriptures from the Jews, the Old Covenant from the Jews, the patriarchs come from the Jews, the prophets come from the Jews. The whole idea of the covenant comes from the Jews. The Jews have been immensely important to us. In fact, Pius XII and then John Paul II, the sainted John Paul II, said that we should regard the Jews as our elder brothers in the faith of Abraham. So that's the way we understand the Jews. We had a mission in the first century of the church, a mission to the Jews, in fact, and it was largely successful. Now, Judaism did continue on as a separate world religion. Many Jews became Christians, and our relationship to the Jewish people today is a little more complex. How do we go ahead and share Messiah with the Jewish people? But you're nowhere near doing that. And so my answer to you is, take your seat with the devil.
So I'll put that down as you don't hate Jews?
I love Jewish people, okay. And I love Jewish history.
Very good. Next, Mark in Cleveland asks, for the record, I oppose the Supreme Court's decision on same-sex so-called marriage. I've heard it said many times that throughout history and across cultures, marriage has been understood to be between one man and one woman. But according to the Wikipedia page, polygamy is legal in many parts of Africa and Asia. So how do you square these two views?
Yeah, you know, slogans, activists have problems with slogans, and that slogan doesn't quite get it right. The truth is, history tells us that marriage was between male and female, not one man, one woman. Because after the fall, we've got polygamy that emerges very early on in biblical history, and it's emerged all over the globe in human history. So you're right, the life of Muhammad, for instance, is marked by polygamy. Joseph Smith and Brigham Young, the first 2 prophets of Mormonism, were polygamists. Polygamy is getting some attention today because people are saying, look, if the Supreme Court can't tell us that marriage is limited by gender, they're not going to be able to tell us that marriage is limited by number. So you're going to see the courts are going to deal with the question of polygamy again. I don't think they've dealt with it since 1878 when there was a decision, the Reynolds versus United States of America. And the Supreme Court at that time said polygamy was unacceptable because of the Christian character of the United States. Things have changed a great deal.
Okay, moving on. Dennis in Saginaw wants to know if you are aware of a study by PLOS ONE, that's PLOS ONE, titled Decision Rightness and Emotional Responses to Abortion in the United States, a longitudinal study. It's being used by the mainstream media to counter the well-established condition of post-abortion syndrome. Is this a study that pro-life people should be concerned about?
Well, it's one of those things where you want to be concerned about anything that comes out on this, especially if it claims to be a good, solid academic study. The problem here, and this is pointed out, by the way, by Dr. Priscilla Coleman at Bowling Green University, where she serves as professor of family and human development, the study is flawed. It was intended to be a serious study, but it's got all kinds of design flaws in it. For instance, a study like this, usually you want 70% participation in the people that you approach. They only got 37.5% participation. And Dr. Coleman points this out in her critique of the study, which you can get a hold of at AveMariaRadio.net. Just go to our Planned Parenthood resource page. But only 37.5% of those they intended to participate did respond. They paid $350 for participation. Now, that's a mild form of coercion, especially with people in lower socioeconomic brackets. Most abortions, though, are concentrated in higher socioeconomic brackets. And so the study, by appealing, and by the way, they admit that the participation is concentrated in the lower socioeconomic classes. They admit that. But what that means is you don't have a clear picture of abortion-minded women throughout the United States. There are other problems that are associated with this particular study. For instance, they don't take into account the gestational age when the abortions occurred. And it's well known from previous studies that regret or concern about abortion increases the longer the pregnancy has gone on, and the mother apparently has had greater time to bond with her baby. So for those reasons, and others that Dr. Coleman points out, the study shouldn't really give us that much concern, but we should know about it. We should be able to respond to criticisms.
Again, you can find that rebuttal at AveMariaRadio.net. In the Planned Parenthood resource page.
Absolutely.
Very easy to find, right at the top of the website. Let's move on. Laura on Facebook asks simply, can you direct me to a good explanation and defense of the Novus Ordo?
Well, let me say, as you probably already know, the literature on this is enormous. So in absence of a more technical or specific question, let me just refer you to Jimmy Akin's book, Mass Revisions. It deals slightly with what you're asking, but when you read it, you might be able to clarify the question, and I'll be glad to take it in more detail sometime in the future. But Jimmy's book, Mass Revisions, has the great advantage of not only dealing with liturgical changes, but also explaining the Mass, the vestments, the rites. I think you'll find it of great benefit. And don't forget, it's also called the Mass of Pope Paul VI. And for most Catholics, the fact that Pope Paul VI promulgated this Mass, and we've been using it for almost 50 years now, that itself is a pretty darn good argument for its validity or its satisfaction. So,
again, that's Mass Revision. Jimmy Akin, I think it's published by Catholic Answers.
Catholic Answers publishes, yeah.
Last question. James from San Francisco says, I stopped listening to your show a while back because your extreme need to promote religions that are non-Catholic. You spend an extreme amount of time worrying about our Christian brothers. Why do you spend more time identifying as Christian instead of Catholic?
Well, the truth is I use both, Christian and Catholic, and I have very good reason for that. If you're a serious Catholic and you take seriously the teaching of the Church, whether it's John Paul II's Et Unum Sint, or if it's the Decree on Ecumenism from the documents of Vatican II, the restoration of unity among Christians is not just some sort of add-on to our mission. It is at the heart of our mission. Why do I say that? Because our mission is the presentation of the gospel, the good news that Christ has reconciled us with the Father and that He's given us the Holy Spirit to reconcile us among ourselves. Jesus in John chapter 14, from 14 to 17, that long high priestly prayer a number of times, He essentially gives the world the right to judge whether the Father sent the Son by the degree of observable love and unity that they witness on the part of His disciples. Now, John Paul II gets at this in Et Unum Sint, that they may be one. And he says it's a great tragedy that evangelism and missionary work around the world is presently being slowed down and stymied because of the hypocrisy of Christians not being able to worship together, share communion together. So we have to work for the restoration of unity among Christians. That same document, the Decree on Ecumenism, tells us not to place any unnecessary impediments or obstacles in the way of non-Catholics so that they can understand the faith better. A lot of people outside the Catholic Church don't know that Catholics consider all baptized people and those who have faith in Jesus as being, in some imperfect way, in communion with the Catholic Church. So I use the word Christian to reassure our many non-Catholic listeners that they are indeed family. And I'm not interested, they may be still living in a tent outside the main house, as a Catholic might see it. They may not have the fullness of the faith as Catholics see it, but they're family, and we want to get everybody in eventually at the same table. That's why I use Christian and Catholic. I think it satisfies the needs. Plus, Acts chapter 11, verse 26, in Antioch, we were called Christians first. 1 Peter 4:16, I think it is, it calls us Christians. And Acts 26:28 calls us Christians as well. We're not called Catholic until Ignatius of Antioch, after the close of the New Testament. So if you want to be picky about it, Christian is used for our community before the word Catholic was.
Well, Al, these are all the questions that we have time for today. Anything we know coming up for next week?
Next week, we're going to deal with the apocalypse. Why? Getting lots of email. People think that with Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish holiday of Rosh Hashanah coming up, that there's going to be something like the rapture or the end of history or the Last Judgment or Christ's return. How do we live with that? That's what we're going to be talking about. But what I'd like you to do is comment below if you've been hearing a lot about these predictions and biblical prophetic scenarios. So just comment below, okay?
Thank you very much, Al. This does conclude our first edition of Free Range Q&A with Al Kresta. As Al mentioned, if you have any burning questions about the Catholic faith, Al is not chicken in his answers. So please comment below, ask those questions. They will be on a subsequent edition of Free Range Q&A with Al Kresta. Thanks for being with us.